The reek became her crown, and decay turned into her only comfort. This is how chroniclers described the woman remembered in history as Juana the Mad. She was Queen of Castile, heiress to Spain's realms, and daughter of Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon. Her story unfolded as one long chain of humiliation, rot, and obsession. Yet everything began with a tragedy that broke not just her mind, but also the monarchy itself. Juana entered the world in 1473. From her first breath, her destiny was ruled by dynastic plans. In 1496, she was wed to Philip of Habsburg, known as the Handsome, son of the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and grandson of the Duke of Burgundy. Their union was not born of affection, but of calculation. The alliance with the Habsburgs was meant to fortify Spain's influence in Europe, but from this cold pact grew something far darker and destructive. Philip, praised as the Handsome for his looks, was notorious for his weakness toward women. Juana, by contrast, carried a prideful and jealous nature from her youth. Their marriage burned with passion but was plagued by constant scandal. She suspected betrayal and staged outbursts of jealousy, even in public, leaving courtiers shocked. Yet these quarrels were still seen as part of the usual theater of royal unions. But in 1506, everything changed when Philip suddenly died at just 28. His death crushed Juana, and she never truly recovered. Accounts say the queen would not permit his body to be buried. She commanded that he be placed in a coffin lined with black velvet, and she kept it beside her instead of putting on the mourning dress that her station required with rituals and decisions of state. Her private chamber turned into a tomb. At first, the court thought her grief would fade, but as weeks passed into months, the body continued to rot. Still, the queen refused to let him go. Witnesses swore she ordered the coffin opened so she could see his face. The corpse gave off a terrible stench, yet Juana, lost in her deranged devotion, inhaled it and called it the breath of love. Servants, confidants, and confessors tried to end this madness, but every attempt to bring her back to reality collapsed into hysteria. She would sit endlessly by the coffin, stroke the cold remains, and even speak to them as if life still lingered. A chilling detail survived from those who watched. She asked to air out the body by lifting the lid, and even demanded the coffin follow her on journeys. From then on, she and her husband's corpse became inseparable. Whenever Juana moved through the castle, soldiers and priests escorted the coffin at her side. On the road, she halted the procession, ordered the lid raised, and stared at the decaying face. As the body grew ever more grotesque, Juana refused to accept death. Those who lived then wrote that the stench itself had become part of her world. The stench of rot spread through the palaces and monasteries where the queen paused. Her attendants complained their clothes and hair carried the odor, impossible to remove, though for Juana it felt like a natural state. She no longer sensed how incense, fume, and candles used by monks and courtiers attempted to hide the reek of decay. It was only the beginning. Her mind was broken, and with it the figure of the queen in the eyes of the people declined. From the honored daughter of Isabella of Castile, she became an object of fear and whisper. In towns and villages people claimed the Queen of Castile slept beside her husband's corpse, and that shadows had entered her spirit. Thus began the story where death and rot grew part of her being. It was the first step into the abyss that dragged on for decades. After Philip's death, the wandering with the coffin became ritual, where the ruling reality was the odor. The queen commanded stables kept sealed so no wind could steal the soul, and chambers grew stagnant. Incense was heaped, Syrian oils poured into flames, vinegar sprinkled in corners. But everything only mixed with the sour rot of fabrics and timber soaked with poison of the corpse. The servants changed the sheets often, some escaped, others fell ill with vomiting and migraines. Still more begged to be sent to the stables, where manure smelled more bearable. Juana dismissed her women, forbade them to comb her hair, until the strands tangled in knots crawling with vermin. They tried burning them with a candle, but the queen flinched and pressed out the wick with her hand. Her gown went unchanged for weeks, until the cloth rustled with dried sweat and dust, yet pleased to replace it met refusal. Water in the basin stood so long that a rainbow film covered the surface. "Do not touch," she ordered, and the basin remained until the next journey. At night, the coffin was carried into the next chamber, yet the doors stayed open. Juana required to hear the steps of the guards and the whisper of nuns posted in the corridor. 2 curtains hung in her room, one behind the bed, the other before the vessel. They were drawn not by schedule, but when guards allowed a window open to let out the steam. Wet stains on the stone floor were scrubbed with rags, treated with vinegar, scattered with dry herbs. The air grew pungent like in a tannery. The servants walked silently, stepping along the marked path from the threshold to the bed and back without touching the vessels. On the road, stopping at monasteries, the queen ordered women kept from the coffin and the windows of her chamber boarded shut. Raw logs burned in the stove. Smoke spread along the ceiling, mixing with damp fog of the corridor. Bread lasted longer in the stale air. The slices hardened and dried but did not strengthen the smell. The soup was consumed cold. Vapors rose from the floor with the heat, and the queen frowned. The guard noted inside stood a tin table, 2 chairs, a wide bed with a canopy and several chests. On the lids of the chests were herbs and bowls of vinegar. Candles were replaced 2 or 3 times daily, but soot clung to the canopy, leaving the cloth greasy beneath the hand. In the corner were wooden tubs of water, disliked to be moved. The queen insisted water retained memory of touch and should not be disturbed. The tubs grew coated with a slimy film and gave a swampy odor. Juana washed her hands rarely and poorly. She dampened her fingers and rubbed them on her skirt. A sour smell lingered on her palms, half vinegar, half sweat. When nurses asked to cleanse her face, the queen turned aside, pressing her sleeve against her nose. In time, the habit of muffling odor with fabric became a gesture repeated by all nearby. A priest in flight, a guard captain in his report, nuns carrying a bowl of soup. The chamber door was seldom opened in daylight. Drafts annoyed the queen, and light on the floor revealed stains she preferred not to speak of. A half circle of marks lay near the curtains, dark patches by the table legs. The path from bed to the door showed where the vessels were placed. Just beyond the threshold rested a chest of Zola. Rags were dipped in it before stepping in. Zola, said the steward, kept back the smell. Each day the Zola was changed. The old poured into a barrel and taken to the yard, where the stench was lighter than under the ceiling. The letters leaving Tordesillas carried an odor. The paper was kept from the fire, yet smoke had soaked the fibers. Nurses said the packet could be known by its scent, a blend of incense, vinegar, and something they in writing called strangled. When inspectors came from the council, they were told in advance, "Do not stay long in the chambers. The queen is irritable. The air is heavy." They bowed quickly, wrote in notebooks that Her Majesty was awake, and left fast to catch breath in the palace garden between wall and river. Winter proved worse than summer. The stove burned coal that made the throat ache. The windows were shut, and dampness weighed down the sheets. Summer gave no ease. Warm stone lifted smells from cracks of the floor, and the queen ordered the bed moved a step, only not above the foul place. Servants, whispering to one another, said she sensed stench as others hear a bell. She caught shades, remembered where it was stronger, where it was duller, and shaped her day on an unseen map of odors. Gradually the stench ceased to shock, becoming routine. Hours were marked by candles, labor by bowls of herbs, silence by how the air stood still under the canopy. In these rooms, monarchy clung to a craft. How to give water without a refusal, how to take away a vessel in silence, how to change bedding without touching skin. The queen seldom raised her voice. She simply breathed as the air allowed her, which she made into her law. The obsession with handsome Philip became the axis around which Juana's life revolved. If at first her loyalty looked like grief of a widow, soon it grew twisted, painful, and frightening to all who saw. Her husband's coffin became the core of her life. She commanded it moved to every residence, never permitting burial. In Tordesillas, a dark chest with the corpse was kept in the next chamber. The doors never closed. Juana demanded his nearness be felt always. She ordered the lid opened each day to be sure her husband remained. Each time servants lifted the heavy cover, a sharp odor of decay poured from within. They wrinkled, crossed themselves, and turned aside. But the queen bent over the remains, breathed the stench, and whispered phrases that resembled prayers. Servants told how she touched the decayed face, stroked the darkened skin, as if it still lived. At times she lifted the dead hand and pressed it to her chest, claiming she felt its warmth. The most loyal servants recalled that at night muffled speeches came from her rooms. Juana conversed with her late husband, asked his counsel, lamented to ministers and children. Of course no reply came, but for her it was a true dialogue. With time the odor grew so harsh that monks and guards would not near the coffin. Then Juana devised her means to fight the reek. She commanded incense rubbed on the corpse, clouds of resinous smoke, yet still it failed. The chronicles tell dreadful accounts. Once the queen ordered fragrant oils mixed with her own excretions and spread on the cloths in which Philip rested. She was convinced her scent would unite them forever. For others, this proved beyond doubt that Juana's reason was destroyed. The travel with the coffin turned into a procession of death. On the roads peasants beheld the royal march halt. Soldiers raised the heavy lid, and the queen, with priests beside her, knelt before the rotting body. The villagers crossed themselves. Some murmured prayers, others whispered tales of the Queen of Castile allied with the devil. Even Juana's children fell victims to her mania. When her eldest sons begged to bury their father, she flew into rage, branding them traitors. The guard wrote that she cried they wished to steal his soul. From then the children were kept from her, held away from the mother whose conduct unnerved even hardened warriors of the court. In Tordesillas the reek of decay became part of daily life. Servants carried bags of herbs under their garments, yet it brought no relief. The rooms with the coffin were never aired, and the halls near the doors became dead zones, entered only on command. A monk recorded that the walls seemed steeped in malice, and even after years it was hard to endure the place without torment. For Juana, this appeared natural. She not only resisted nothing but found in malice proof that her husband remained, that he reeked as the dead must reek. Such words were ascribed by confessors. She believed if the odor ceased, their bond would be broken. By 1505 no one doubted the queen had lost her mind. Yet her rank as daughter of Isabella of Castile and mother of Charles V did not permit the court to declare her end as a ruler. She was kept guarded with a corpse wrapped in malice, which became her emblem, replacing throne and crown. From 1505 to 1509 Juana was brought to Tordesillas, the castle monastery upon the Duero. In name she stayed queen, but in truth was captive of her kin and her own obsession. There her life froze for long decades, and all about her turned into a sealed realm of malice, damp and rot. Her chambers were ever night, narrow windows shut with cloth and boards. She feared the light and draughts, convinced the wind might steal the breath of her soul. The stone walls grew mold, and the limestone floor blackened in places from soot of candles and fire. The air hung heavy and dense. It bore the odor not only of the ancient coffin but of her daily existence. The drains spilled herbal brews, sour meals, smoke from raw coal. The servants worked on strict schedule. They neared the door of her chamber, covered their faces with cloths soaked in vinegar, and only then stepped inside. The vessel was emptied rarely, only when its contents could not be ignored. The floors of the chamber were dotted with damp circles, and stains crept along the walls that no one dared to scrub away. To clean the rooms was nearly impossible. The queen herself banned moving objects, insisting that things knew their place. The bed stood in the center. The sheets were replaced once in weeks, by then already drenched, then with malice. The air was thickest beneath the canopy. At night she often woke, sat up in bed and muttered words into the dark. A chronicler wrote her speech resembled dialogue with a hidden partner. All knew this partner was still dead Philip. Her husband's coffin stood beyond the wall in the next chamber. Guards and monks assigned to him carried out the absurd command of the queen never to leave the corpse unwatched. Several times yearly she ordered the lid unsealed and herself admitted. Then the guards withdrew, and Juana lingered hours beside the remains. It was said that in those hours the malice grew so heavy even strong men fled to keep from fainting. For her it was a sacred rite, a proof she was not alone. Rumors of her captivity spread across Castile. Peasants told each other the queen lived in ruins, that she conversed with the corpse, that her palace had become a tomb. The monks whispered God struck her for pride and for refusing her husband's death as divine will. Courtiers who visited her chambers tried never to remain more than minutes. Their garments held the stench long after, and with that stench they bore witness to the truth of what they had seen. At times the queen fell into a state when she refused all food. For weeks she touched only dry bread and drank water from a bowl in the corner of her chambers long coated with slime. At moments she demanded meat, yet flung it on the floor, saying he would choose himself if he wished to taste. Then scraps of food lay until covered in mold and gave off a choking odor, mingling with the general stench. Her daughter, young Catalina, dwelled with her for years in such misery. The girl was kept in the same fortress so Juana would not sink into deeper fury. Witnesses wrote the child wept without cease and feared to remain beside her mother at night when she spoke with her father's corpse. Attempts to remove Catalina brought seizures, and monks were forced to leave them together. Thus years passed, kings changed beyond the walls, new lives were born and ended, while time froze inside Tordesillas. The malice grew familiar, like the ringing of a bell or the murmur of a stream. To the queen it proved her world endured, her husband still near. She drowned within the odor, turning it into power, into the sole attribute no one could steal away. Juana endured confinement more than 40 years. When her hair turned gray and her body frail, life in malice became her only truth. She no longer marked the seasons, cared nothing for politics, knew no word of wars or of her children's unions. Her son Charles rose emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and among Europe's strongest rulers. But for Juana it was but a distant echo. Her world held only the walls of Tordesillas, the coffin of her husband, and the smell of rot. The queen's chamber turned into a place of rot, floors black with wet stains, walls layered with mold, and the air a mix of damp soil and stale filth. The vessel was carried out less and less often. Guards and servants dreaded her fits of madness. At times the filth stayed for weeks until it spilled over. The monastery's chronicler wrote the odor clung so deep it lived in garments forever, carried away even after changing. The queen's bed remained in place, its canopy soaked with soot and greasy remains. The sheets were replaced only when falling apart from dirt and damp, yet even new ones quickly drew in the foul air of her peace. The reek beneath the canopy was most suffocating, and there Juana spent hours speaking to herself. The servants noted her speech grew endless. She might address dead Philip, her mother Isabella, or the holy images on the walls. At times she laughed, at others she wept, but most often her voice came dull and broken, like one long apart from reality. Several attempts were made to draw her into rites. Icons and crucifixes burned with candles, but Juana denied them. She claimed her faith lay in her husband, and only he could guide her to God. From then priests visited rarely. They saw their presence brought her fury. While her body withered, she ate little, lost weight and strength. With age came constant pains and feeble legs. Yet even so she refused to leave her chamber, insisting she remain by Philip's remains. Her husband's coffin was never rightly buried. It stood in the castle, a grim reminder of the queen's madness. Tales of her life in Tordesillas spread through Spain and beyond. People whispered that the Queen of Castile lived in filth and spoke to the dead. For common folk it grew into legend, a symbol of how power and madness entwined. Juana died in 1555, after nearly half a century locked away. Her body was carried from chambers where the stench had built for decades. Only then was the castle open to air after so many years. Those who entered wrote the walls and stones seemed to hold smells that could never be removed. So ended the life of a woman called insane, not as a ruler or heiress of famed parents, but as a shadow that endured in stench and filth. She lived imprisoned not by enemies or kin, but by her mind and the reek she made her last devotion.